Everybody, and morning everybody. Welcome to the hearing of the Tata Valley rezoning proposal. Given that we've got essentially a professional audience only, there's not lay submitters that are wanting to be heard and so forth, I don't think we need to spend very much time on the preliminaries about how the process will run, other than to say that we have read all the material that's been provided to us, the Section 42A report, the rebuttal version thereof, the evidence, the rebuttal evidence, the hearing summaries, etc. So we're really looking for people today to provide us with highlights packages. We're not really interested in people reading vast chunks of material that we've already read. That applies also to the legal subs, Ms. Everett. We have read those. The nature of the high degree of agreement there is between the Section 42A report author, Mr. Wyeth, and the Tata Valley team is helpful from our point of view. So we're really looking for you guys to obviously describe the proposal to us, but not go into chapter and verse on material that we've already read or that is not necessarily of huge consequence in the final outcome. So are there any questions about that from anybody? I will ask everybody to introduce themselves in a moment, but I just wanted to make that pretty clear before we start. So I think my name's Phil Mitchell. I should have done that at the very outset. I'm chairing these hearings. I'm an independent hearings commissioner. I'll ask the panel and then everybody else in the room to do likewise, please.
Good morning, Janet Gibb, Councillor at the Waikato District Council, Independent Commissioner.
I'm Jan Sedgwick. I'm also a councillor at Waikato District Council and appointed as an Independent Hearings Commissioner. Thank you.
Morena koutou, Will Marg, Independent Commissioner.
I'm Paul Cooney, Deputy Chair, Independent Commissioner and lawyer.
I should just note before we go around the room too that we have a commissioner who has a medical appointment at 9 o'clock who will be joining us shortly. We'll deal with the matter of what that person has and hasn't heard. But that's Commissioner Fulton. He will be joining us as soon as he's able to. I won't stop the proceedings for him to reintroduce himself, but he will be here shortly. So if the rest of the people in the room wouldn't mind quickly introducing themselves, please, that would be helpful.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners and everyone else in the room. My name's Jerome Wyeth. I'm the reporting officer for the Tata Valley Zone Rehearing topic.
Thank you, Mr. Wyeth.
Good morning, I'm Sandra Kelly. I'm the Senior Project Coordinator for the District Plan.
Good morning, Chair, and good morning to the panel members. It's Ms. Everett for Tata Valley Limited.
Thanks, Ms. Everett.
Morning all, Fletcher Bell here, District Plan Administrating Hearings Coordinator, thanks.
Morena koutou, I'm Carolyn Reid, assisting Waikato District Council.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Siki Singh and I'm a consultant planner to the panel.
Good morning, Adam Thompson, providing economic evidence for Tata Village Limited.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Welcome.
Kia ora koutou, Tim Martin from Wildland Consultants, ecologist for the applicant.
Thanks. Morning, Mr. Martin.
Leo Hills, commute traffic engineer for the applicant, Tata Valley.
Mr. Hills, welcome.
Morning, Rob Pryor, landscape architect, landscape and visual for the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Pryor. Welcome.
Good morning. I'll go next. Chris. Good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Grafton. I'm consultant planner for Tata Valley Limited.
Thanks, Mr. Scrafton.
Good morning. I'm Chris Edwards. I'm the engineering geologist from Lana Geotechnical, working for the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards.
Kia ora koutou, Kelly Bingham, part of the planning team for Tata Valley.
Thank you, Ms Bingham.
Good morning. I can't turn on my video, but this is Elsa Fisher. I'm also part of the planning Tata team.
Thank you. Good morning.
Perhaps I'd just indicate on behalf of the Tata Valley team, as you'll appreciate, we've got a number of expert witnesses that have been part of the rezoning proposal and supporting the applicant through the process. We have a number of the team here with us today at our offices, and we'll call on them as appropriate to give their highlight packages, and other members of the team obviously have joined online. So we've got a bit of a mixture going on, so that's why you'll see some faces on screen and others will pop up later. So you'll just bear with us as we go through those hearing logistics. This is a bit new to us with a team of this size.
That's fine. Thank you very much. Mr. Wyeth, I think we're ready to hear from you to present your Section 42A report summary, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so I have prepared a sort of highlights summary statement, which I'll read through very briefly. As you've noted, there's a high level of alignment between myself and the planning acting on behalf of Tata Valley Limited. So yeah, my name is Jerome Jeffrey Wyeth. I'm the reporting officer on the Tata Valley Resort topic. Overall, there are 9 submission points on the Tata Valley Resort Zone and 65 further submission points on those topics. The proposal was essentially to rezone 235 hectares of land located approximately 2k southwest of Pokeno from rural to a bespoke Tata Valley Resort Zone. So for the reasons outlined in my evidence, I'm recommending that rezoning request is accepted, subject to some refinements to the provisions and some further amendments that I will touch on.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Wyeth. I think you did a double take. It's probably because I've put your summary statement on the screen. So if you want to refer to that, and other people can refer to that readily, that's why I've done that. But
okay, yep, I can do that. So for succinctness, I do not intend to go into the details of my recommendations or repeat the detail in my Section 42A report and rebuttal evidence in this opening statement. Rather, the statement provides a brief overview of the proposed Tata Valley Zone, a summary of my recommendation in relation to the rezoning request, and my recommended changes to the provisions, which are really focused on the objectives and policies, an overview of 2 further refinements that I'm recommending since preparing my rebuttal evidence, and 1 remaining area of contention, which I do not consider to be that significant in the context of this overall rezoning request. So as you'll be aware, the proposed zone is located at 2 properties owned by Tata Valley Limited at 242 Bluff Road and 335 Trib Road, which I'll refer to as the site. So the site has a combined land area approximately 255 hectares and located 2 kilometres southwest of Pokeno. And I'll bring up a couple of maps just focused on proposed zoning and our recommendations in relation to the rezoning request shortly. So it's located approximately 5 km east of Tuakau, and the Waikato River is located along the southern boundary of the site. Site is zone rural and operative plan and in the proposed plan, and there are a number of overlays on the site. This includes a significant amenity landscape along the southern boundary of the site, a Māori sites of significance, 3 significant natural areas, and a flood plain management area as part of that stage 2 plan. So Tata Valley Limited is seeking to develop the site into the Tata Valley Resort. The resort will include a hotel and a farm park and associated tourism, retail and recreational activities that aim to showcase rural New Zealand. Tata Valley has prepared a master plan for the resort and is actively working towards commencing development for a number of resource consent applications, some of which have been granted and some of which are on hold pending further engagement with tangata whenua. So to provide for the site and the ongoing operation of the site, Tata Valley Limited is seeking to rezone the site from rural to a special purpose zone, the proposed Tata Valley Resort Zone. And at a broad level, this resort zone includes a concept plan that spatially sets out the areas to be developed and managed within the overall site. A range of provisions from objectives through to rules that seek to provide for the development and operation of the site, while also managing adverse effects. And the proposed zone also incorporates a number of the rural zone provisions as recommended by the reporting officer, and recognition of the close relationship between the proposed zone and the rural environment. I might just show, so this is a benefit. Should I share my screen, or are people?
No, you share your screen if you prefer. Look, it's probably easier if you do that than me.
I'm just going to do a quick. I mean, this is the notified zones with the overlays. So this is the notified significant amenity landscape, which has been reduced in scope as agreed. Well, it's recommended to be reduced in size by the reporting officer for the landscapes hearing topic. So it essentially comes down to this, which will be shown in some of the concept plan maps that Tata Valley will produce. There's 3 significant areas down the bottom here, and the Māori site significant is here. Sorry, that's not what I want. Stop that. I might just carry on with the.
Do you want me to reshare the screen, or do you just want to carry on? I'm easy either way.
Oh, you can reshare the screen. That would be fine. People can see the words in front of them.
Here we go.
So I guess on the summary statement here, that shows my the recommended recommended rezoning, which you can see there, which would be a special purpose zone, the Tata Valley Resort, and this is shown in Appendix 2 of my Section 42A report. The main reasons I'm recommending the rezoning request is accepted is, firstly, in my opinion, the proposal is consistent with the relatively statutory requirements and gives effect to the high order planning documents to the extent relevant. Secondly, the proposed zone and concept plan will enable the site to be developed in an integrated manner that will deliver economic and employment benefits to the district while also achieving good environmental outcomes. And fundamental to that is the fact that the applicant has actually identified additional areas of significant Indigenous biodiversity on the site and proposes to manage and protect those, which I think is a positive outcome, particularly from what was in the original submission. Lastly, the proposed resort provides more certainty to the landowner, council processing officers and the community about the future development and the management of the site. And in my opinion, this will help to reduce the potential for inefficiencies and inconsistent outcomes as the site is progressively developed in stages for ongoing consenting processes. However, in my opinion, the objectives and policies as notified or as proposed in the original submission were overly focused on enabling the development and operation of the site with insufficient weight given to the management of adverse effects and the protection and maintenance and enhancement of ecological, cultural and values. So as you'll be aware of, I've recommended a number of changes to the objective policies, which have largely been agreed with the planner acting on behalf of Tata Valley. And they are shown in Appendix 2 of my rebuttal evidence. So the key changes I'm recommending is amendment to proposed Objective 02 to reference the character and amenity of the surrounding rural environment, amendments to proposed policy P3, which relates to the sort of concept plan to also refer to those areas that need to be protected and managed within the overall site, and amendments to proposed policy P4 to sort of strengthen the management of adverse effects through direction to protect and restore the values of the Waikato River, manage the effects on the amenity and character of the surrounding rural environment, and provide for the safe and efficient operation and functioning of the traffic network. Overall, the intent of these recommended amendments is to highlight the key environmental effects to be considered and ensure better management of effects. In my opinion, this will help to provide a more appropriate balance and enable sites to be developed in a way that contributes to social and economic well-being while ensuring adverse effects are appropriately managed and positive environmental outcomes are achieved. So in terms of, since preparing my rebuttal evidence, I've had some further correspondence with Mr. Scrafton, who's the planner acting on behalf of Tata Valley, and recommending two further refinements to two policies. Again, these are relatively minor in scope, in my opinion. The first relates to policy P3, which is really just ensuring the wording better reflects those district-wide policies that relate to significant natural areas, significant amenity landscapes, and Māori sites of significance. So that's really just adopting the wording recommended by the reporting officer for those chapters. And then I guess into some concerns around the interpretation of maintaining and what that means, and the potential risk that a very strict interpretation is taken. Recommended that the wording of proposed policy P4 is changed to minimise adverse effects on the amenity and character values of the surrounding rural environment, which I think, in my opinion, provides an appropriate alternative. So the ones kind of remaining matter in dispute, and this relates to the identification of additional areas of significant biodiversity on the site, which I think is certainly a positive step in the concept plan. And as you'll be aware, I'm recommending that those SNAs are adopted into the district plan overlay layer. But there are also, as I understand, approximately 19 of those are wetlands that have been identified by Mr. Martin. And Tata Valley is essentially saying that they should not be mapped as wetlands because that's a regional council function and the NES for freshwater provisions apply. And I accept that reasoning, but I also think it's beneficial both from Waikato Council processing officer's point of view and the regional council to understand what areas within site are wetlands and what are natural areas to understand the relevant provisions that apply. So yeah, that's the kind of one main area of outstanding, one area that's outstanding. And as I said, I don't consider it to be a fundamental issue in the context of the overall rezoning request. So this concludes my opening statement, and I look forward to any questions the panel may have.
Thank you. I'll stop sharing the screen. Thank you, Mr. Wyeth. There may well be some questions from the panel. Let's start with you, please, Mr. Marg.
No, nothing from me, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sedgwick?
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
Ms. Gibb?
It's all very clear. Thank you, Mr. Wyeth. No questions.
Mr. Cooney?
No, thank you.
Just a couple from me, Mr. Wyeth. And it's your last point about the area of disagreement and the mapping of wetlands and so forth. My understanding is that the Ministry for the Environment, having issued their guidance document on how to interpret the NPS FM and the National Environmental Standard, have since then issued another guidance document saying that the government is aware of the problems about definitions and implementation of those documents as drafted, and are promising some redrafting, let me put it that way, sometime next year. Does the fact that that's likely to change affect your recommendation regarding the mapping of areas that are significant?
I wasn't actually aware that they had outlined that they were going to amend the NES. I knew that there's guidance out there that's actually creating some more issues and uncertainty. So I'm certainly aware there's a lot of uncertainty around this issue. So that does, I guess, I don't have a strong view as such that this should occur.
Okay.
I guess in my view was that at a high level, it still is good to sort of identify what's a wetland and what's not, even if that doesn't preclude more site-specific sort of assessments being done, which I expect Tata Valley will do as they seek consent.
All right, no, that's helpful, thank you. And various people appearing at the hearing have made mention of various resource consent applications, and the regional council, for example, suggests that the zoning shouldn't proceed until the resource consents are progressed. What's not clear, at least to me, is just what resource consents have been sought and from whom. In some places there's mention of earthworks consents, and there's mention of consent applications to the district council as well. Are you able just to give us without going into detail, I don't want to know, there's 73 resource consents for, an infringement of Rule X, but can you just give us a highlights view of what consents have been sought, from whom, and where they're at in the process? Do you know that information?
At a general level, I do, and my understanding is that consents have been granted for the sort of construction earthworks for the hotel and some of the farm plant development. I'm not sure if that's from both councils.
Yes.
I understand the consents for the land-based applications, including the hotel and some of the river structure consent applications have been lodged with both councils, and other consents that are on hold. Mr. Scrafton might be able to correct me if I'm wrong here. And I also understand that the road connection road has been recently lodged, which mainly sits outside of the zone, but
yes.
Obviously intricate to it.
All right, no, that's helpful, thank you. That's what I inferred, but it wasn't 100% clear, so I'm glad you clarified that for me, thank you. There being nothing else from the panel, thank you, Mr. Wyeth, that's helpful. And we'll pass over to you, Ms. Evatt, please.
Just before I kick off, would it be helpful just to round out that last question by handing first to Mr. Scrafton, because he has obviously quite a detailed knowledge of those consent packages and can probably direct you to an appendix in his primary statement, which will give you a nice summary of that consent package and the different applications.
No, I don't think we need to do that at the moment. I just really wanted an overview. That's what I interpreted from what was prepared, but I just wasn't clear, but it's clarified for now. Thank you.
No problem. All right, well, that being the case, I will start. Thank you for your earlier indication as to how you want to run the hearing today. You'll be aware that when we were preparing the material for hearing, that was some couple of weeks back, and it was a compressed timetable. So we've had time to reflect and also further discussions with the reporting officer. So things have moved on somewhat.
Oh,
so
and that's helpful. I should also say we're not trying to short circuit your ability to present your case.
Absolutely understood.
We're simply wanting to record the fact that we have read the material, so we're pretty on top of the detail, and we just want to be efficient in the process that we're running. No more than that, but we don't want to cut you short either. So
no, that's understood. Look, we'll keep that message on board. Obviously, the team is very excited to be here. It's been a long time in the development and planning exercise. So
sure.
It's an exciting time for everyone. So I do have a number of people here who will be looking forward to sharing the details of the proposal with you. So with that in mind, I will try and keep my piece relatively short. To the extent that you have pre-read the legal submissions and there are areas that you would like to sort of skip over or focus on, then please do indicate that to me, but I will attempt to do that myself as I go through. There is one section where I have set out how the resort provisions work. Mr. Wyeth has already covered that just by overview very briefly in his statement. But I think actually reflecting on that, it would be more helpful at that point after my overview if I hand over to Mr. Scrafton, who's obviously much closer to the provisions and the plans for the site. We have prepared quite a short bundle of drawings and photos of the site, and we shared those with the administrator yesterday.
Yep.
And we thought it actually might be helpful to the panel if we bring those up, help orient with with the plans and the site.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Provisions. So my plan at this stage is just to go through my overview briefly and then hand to Mr. Scrafton, then come back to the submissions and try and take you through sort of the key highlights, noting what you said earlier, and then we'll start with the witnesses.
Very good, thank you.
All right, great. So then I'll turn to my written submissions, obviously just starting with the overview. The vision for Tata Valley is to develop its site into a destination location for tourism and recreation activities, which will showcase rural New Zealand. The Tata Valley Resort will ultimately include a hotel with a conference and event space, camping and glamping throughout the site, a ferry service from the site in Pokeno through to Mercer, a New Zealand-made hub to showcase rural New Zealand and other recreational activities. When completed, it will be a significant tourism and recreation asset for the district, generate significant economic benefit, and enable a new and important, in my view, recreational access to the Waikato River for the community. The site is ideally located and lends itself to this development, with its rural countryside location and views out to the Waikato River. It's located within a highly modified working environment, but also contains a number of natural landscape features and elements that will assist in integrating and screening future development from that surrounding environment. The resort has been planned and master planned actually to showcase those natural values and also the Waikato River itself, and also provide opportunities to connect, to strengthen that connection to the river and also the significant features on the site. The site is also located proximate to Auckland International Airport and on the road to other popular tourist destinations, I should say, in the Waikato and Bay of Plenty. Now, without wanting to dip too far into the evidence, I did want to note a few points there, because as Mr. Thompson explains, Auckland Airport is obviously quite a significant entry point for international tourists, or was pre-COVID, and I'll come to that.
Hopefully it will be again one day soon.
Indeed, and I will come to that. But the site is obviously, in that regard, well located to capture visitors and tourists from Auckland who are travelling overland from Auckland to Rotorua and Taupo and elsewhere in the North Island. And as Mr. Thompson explains, this really suggests a large potential market to retain that expenditure in the North Waikato. There is also a shortfall of quality hotels in the Waikato and Southern Auckland region. So this proposal really offers the first large-scale resort both in that North Waikato and also South Auckland region. So it's a very exciting proposition in that regard. Now, to realise Tata Valley's vision, the applicant does require changes to the district plan. It has participated in many hearing processes through the proposed plan process, but really this rezoning proposal is the key to the success of its development proposal on the site. And as you know, we are seeking a special purpose zone for that. The rezoning is intended to complement the consent packages that are underway. The two work hand in hand. And it is intended to both complement and enable those consent packages that are underway, but also ensure the continued operation and successful development of the resort into the future. Both are necessary. So over time, the resort will provide for a range of accommodation and tourist-related activities. And Tata Valley intends to transform the site into a unique experience where visitors can stay, relax, explore and be entertained with a variety of attractions whilst showcasing New Zealand's products in a rural environment. And this will have a number of benefits for the wider Pokeno community, including job creation and increased visitors in the area. Now, the rezoning will deliver significant employment benefits for the district. And as Mr. Thompson will explain, the resort will be one of the district's largest tourism facilities once it's completely built out. Now, these benefits have been outlined in Tata Valley's evidence, and they've also been acknowledged quite rightly by Mr. Wyeth. The benefits include approximately 40 to 60 FTEs per annum from construction, and with an estimated construction of over 3 years, that's 130 to 180 FTEs in total. When it's fully operational, there's an estimated 220 FTEs per annum from the operation of the resort. And I've also recorded there a net present value estimate of 163 million to 382.8 million. It's a significant investment for the district and the region. And I think quite rightly, the reporting officer has concluded that the resort zone will help enable the site to be developed and managed in a way that delivers these substantial economic benefits, but also achieves positive environmental outcomes. And I think that the applicant should be commended because there has been a lot of technical assessment that has been done, and the constraints, both in terms of constraints and the features on the site, have been duly met and recognised and provided for in the provisions. So in my view, this proposal represents a really great opportunity for development, but also appropriate recognition of those environmental features and ensures their protection. The reporting officer has done a comprehensive assessment of the proposal and agrees with Mrs. Scrafton that the proposed resort zone is generally consistent with and gives effect to the relevant statutory requirements. And consistent with the evidence of our Tata Valley's experts, has also concluded that the proposed zone will adequately manage the effects of the activities and development enabled under the provisions. I will just turn now to the issue around, obviously, the disruption that has occurred as a result of COVID. Because of course, when we first lodged this submission, that wasn't actually an issue that was on the table. Tata Valley acknowledges that there has been obviously great disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, and it has changed the global landscape for the time being. And it has impacted on its immediate plans for the full build out of the resort development. However, Tata Valley does not see this disruption as a permanent or substantive roadblocks to its development aspirations for the site. In the short term, Tata Valley has reconsidered its development phasing and timeframes and refocused on ongoing mana whenua and stakeholder engagement. And it's also in the process of undertaking necessary master plan and design refinements resulting from the recent freshwater regulations. Tata Valley has also reprioritised its master planning phases and will likely advance the farm park and tourist related offerings prior to the large scale hotel, although it remains fully committed to that in the longer term. Tata Valley is also confident that the resort and farm park can operate as a successful domestic and tourist destination, offering conference facilities and a business centre in a unique Waikato-based location. The site is ideally placed to provide an accessible conference facility or weekend destination for domestic visitors on the outskirts of Auckland. As Mr. Thompson explains, even taking into account worst case post-COVID tourism recovery assumptions, the resort and tourist offering will deliver a significant economic and community benefit over the longer term. Importantly, rezoning of the site now is critical in this plan review cycle because it complements the consent packages for the resort and the tourist facilities that are underway and will ensure a successful consenting for the remaining phases of the development. This will ensure that the resort is well placed to be delivered at its intended full scale once international tourism recovers. I'd just like to acknowledge the reporting officer's reports and the work that he's done in relation to this proposal. Mr. Wyeth has done a very comprehensive and considered review, and I think that that's worth acknowledging in this forum. I'd also like to acknowledge that he has really tested the key issues in his review process and through the evolution of the 42A and rebuttal 42A report. And I note for the benefit of our team that the evolution and the provisions that has evolved through that process, I think represents a really positive outcome in terms of ensuring an appropriate balance in those provisions. So I'd just like to acknowledge that. I'm now at section 2 of my submissions where I was going to start talking about the zone provisions. And as I indicated earlier, I think at this point it's more helpful to hand over to Mr. Scrafton to take you through those and also some plans for the site. So I'll do that.
Right, thank you.
To start with, I thought it would be helpful to just talk through a bit of context of the site. So we provided some materials yesterday. If we can just have that shared. Is that Mr. Bell?
I can do that. I've got it here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm assuming that's the right document.
That's the one. Excellent, thank you. So if we move to that first slide, it shows the...
I'll just...
Yeah.
Here we go.
Thank you. So this image shows the site and the concept plan that Mr. White referred to earlier. There's two key aspects on the concept plan. One is identifying sites of significance or sensitivity, and the other is identifying development areas. So in terms of the sensitive or significant sites, the image identifies the PAR site, which you'll see is that, I guess on my image it looks blue, little circular shape on the west, midway down. That identifies the PAR site, which was identified by the archaeological assessment and taken by Clough and Associates. The green hatching, which is scattered throughout the site and obviously quite dominating to the south of the site, identifies those areas identified by Mr. Martin as meeting the criteria of the significant natural areas. As alluded to by the reporting officer, the concept plan shows a significant increase in the number that was identified on the site in the notified version of the plan, and that reflects the extent of the ecological assessment that's been undertaken, primarily supporting the resource consent process. We also show with the green dotted line, I guess, running east to west towards the south of the site.
This one.
That's the one, thank you. That identifies the reporting officer's recommendation for the extent of the significant amenity landscape. As noted earlier, that is significantly reduced from the notified version. And again, we provided evidence on that through the significant amenity landscape hearings. In terms of development areas, you'll see to the mid-south of the site, there's a dotted hatching. Thank you. That identifies the hotel precinct, which is the area identified for the hotel development and the spa and the conference facilities. And I'll touch on the provisions that relate to that area a little later. It also identifies the blue. Firstly, we've got a dotted blue line, which identifies existing roading, and the hard blue line, which identifies the future roading network through the site. And if you look to the northeast, and my bearings are getting a real test here, you can identify what's proposed as the new Yashili Drive connection. The existing connection entrance to the site is currently off Potter Road, which is the section going out of the site to the north, which takes you onto what is a rural residential road through Mr. Hill's investigations and other transport experts. There are concerns with that access in terms of the likely volumes of traffic, and as such, and again, as alluded to by the reporting officer, resource consent has been sought for a new connection coming in from the northeast. And I believe
we've driven down that road. Yeah,
so you'll be aware of the. It's particularly problematic for buses, as I understand.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the concept plan. If we move on to the next, unless there's any questions,
No, you just carry on.
Thank you. Sorry, one more back.
Oh, sorry, there's a hair trigger on this.
So this is still the concept. So the one above it's still the concept plan, but we're showing.
Oh, I'm sorry. I see. Sorry.
There's slight nuance. Some of the development plans are shown on this image. So in the hotel precinct, you see the potential footprint of where the hotel would
sorry,
be.
that's my hair trigger. There we go.
Very subtle difference. To the northwest, you can see an area identified as a camping area. To the north central of the site, you see what we're proposing as a farm park area, which shows a number of buildings. There's another image where I can talk a bit more about that. And then to the south of the site, you'll see an area identified as the ferry landing site. And the ferry landing site relates to, there's another site identified in Mercer, and part of that proposal is essentially to run visitors of the site from the Mercer site along the Waikato River to the ferry landing site here, and as an alternate access to the site, and also a tourist activity in itself. If we move to the next image. Thank you. So this is obviously a photograph of the site looking from Potter Road. If you look in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see the view cone of where this was taken from. This is one of a number of viewpoint images prepared by Mr. Pryor. The cleared area in the background is part of, or the majority of, the hotel precinct, and as you can see, some works have been undertaken in that area. The trees in the far distance, so the big group, that's actually on the other side of the Waikato River. And then I thought the other main point to note here is you can tell from the site that it has been a functioning rural environment, lots of artificial waterways constructed for drainage and other things. If we move to the next image, this is a view from the hotel precinct to the river. Again, this is from Mr. Pryor's reporting, and you'll see the red marks identify potential land uses in the distance. As you can see, the closest neighbour to the south is the Smeets Quarry at 1.5 kilometres. Nearest dwelling is on the quarry at 1.7, and then then you've got dwellings on Smeets Road at 3.5. Main point of this image was to just identify the relationship with the river, which is the southern boundary of the site. Quite beautiful down there on a good day. If we move to the next image, so this is an impression, architectural drawings of what the hotel could look like, and is part of the information put forward with the resource consent. So this is, as I say, it's an interpretation of the hotel, and the consenting package that's put in is based on this type of design, but it's not necessarily the final design. And look, Mr. Pryor can comment further on some of the design principles that underpin this, but obviously one of the key points is to use the existing site to reflect the rural character and amenity of the surrounding area. As touched on by Ms. Evett, the hotel includes with its restaurants, spa facilities, swimming pools, conference and events facilities as well. And if you just move on to the final image, thank you. Similar imagery of what's proposed as part of the farm park. So this is the area identified at the north of the site, and you'll see a number of buildings identified here, including cafes, farm show areas, a milk shed, parking area, a reception. But again, these are indicative images, what it could look like. Obviously, the consenting package is somewhat based on these designs. Now, if I touch briefly on the provisions, I thought it would be helpful to give that context before I talk to the provisions. And I'm not going to get into the precise detail, just more the concepts behind some of the provisions. So in terms of objectives and policies, there's two key themes that sit throughout a lot of them. One is about enabling the primary and accessory activities, and the primary activities being those activities that relate to the reason why the site will be of significance. So in particular, tourism and rural tourism, essentially. The other aspects of the provisions relate to the managing of effects, and as Ms. Wyeth notes, there's been some movement in the policy framework in that regard, and I agree with his recommendations. Just note that. The concept of the primary and accessory activities is somewhat inspired by the approach in the major recreation facility zoning in Auckland, where a number of sites are identified as being significant for a reason and are somewhat enabled for those reasons. And it also recognises that to be successful, a number of accessory activities are required to support that. So that's why we use the language such as primary and accessory, but being quite clear on what we mean by what is the primary activities, so that those accessory activities don't become dominant. In terms of the provisions, we've focused a lot on what we mean by supporting rural character, and a lot of you'll note in the provisions we're proposing to adopt a lot of the rural zone provisions, and in particular, provisions relating to built form and site development. So for example, the building height, building setback, earthworks and vegetation clearance rules that are proposed for the Tata Valley zone are all consistent with the rural zone equivalent rules. The exception to that approach is in terms of building coverage, where there is no control proposed within the hotel precinct. And outside of the hotel precinct, it's proposed to be 50,000 square meters for the TVR zone, as opposed to the 5,000 square meters that would apply if it was the rural zone. Just to note, that 50,000 square meters still only equates to 2%-ish broadly of the site. Of that developable area outside of the hotel precinct, there are, again, deviating from the rural zone, visitor accommodation is provided for, but it's intended that it's not set to enable a plethora of large hotels. Outside of the hotel precinct, visitor accommodation is focused at a much lower scale. So it's permitted where it meets the standards, and in particular, building height would be 5 meters or less, and a cumulative building footprint across the area outside the hotel precinct of 1,000 square meters. The other aspect in the provisions, which is probably a key deviation from the rural zone, is the approach to events. So temporary activities are permitted in the rural zone, and those provisions have been adopted here as well with two key changes. One is the removal of the limit on occurrences. So there is unlimited temporary activities in the 12-month period for the TVR zone, but we have included a maximum capacity requirement in those provisions of 500 people. And any event that's proposed to exceed that that threshold of 500 people is required to produce a traffic management plan. And I'd anticipate that that would include things like organised buses for visitors and the like, but Mr. Hills can talk more about that. That's certainly his area. The other key difference in terms of enabling events is the inclusion of what we're calling special noise events. Now, it's anticipated that these would form part of a temporary event, and they provide for an increase of the permitted noise standard, provided a number of respite controls are met. And the respite controls relate to things like duration of event, how many events would occur over a certain period of time, and how many you can undertake in a 12-month period, for example. Again, that approach is consistent with the major recreation facility zone approach in Auckland. It looks quite complex, but it's a way of enabling things such as concerts or large gatherings for, say, a significant wedding or something along those lines. The only other comment I would make is how the approach to subdivision in the provisions that were attached to my primary statement. I recollect we didn't include any subdivision provisions, which was picked up by Mr. Wyeth. We're proposing to adopt the rural subdivision provisions with one difference, which is an additional criteria requiring subdivision to be consistent with the efficient operation of the zone. Mr. Wyeth's original position was to exclude subdivision altogether. We've discussed this, and whilst I don't really see, I'm not anticipating a rush of subdividing of the site. Equally, as long as it's consistent with rural and supportive of the operation of the resort, my view is there's no real concern with that. So that was just a broad overview of some of the key principles.
Thank you, Mr. Scrafton. That's very helpful. Can I just ask one question? It's sort of a matter of detail, and it relates to the restricted discretionary activity matters of discretion. And there are specific matters of discretion relating to visitor accommodation, which are set out in, now I've lost it. But basically, there's general matters of discretion.
Yes.
Then there's matters of discretion relate to exceedances of particular built form standards. And then there's a specific one relating to visitor accommodation. If, for example, and this is just a scenario, if the hotel building was over height, infringed setbacks, would it still be, is the intention of the provisions that it's not just the visitor accommodation matters of RD that apply, but also the matters of discretion relate to the individual exceedances, or are they all intended to be addressed within the visitor accommodation scenario?
Yeah, so the RD matters of discretion for the visitor accommodation relate to the development of the hotel in the hotel precinct.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
Yeah.
But are the other ones still relevant if they're infringed, or are they all intended to be subsumed into that hotel RD criterion?
The others would be relevant.
They would. That's what I thought, but I just wanted you to clarify that because
That's the intent.
I'm not 100% certain. I may be wrong, but I'm not sure that it necessarily, as drafted, quite makes that clear.
Okay.
But I think it's helpful, and I may be wrong on that too. But the indication that that's the intention is that the hotel provisions or the visitor accommodation provisions apply, as do any of the other matters of discretion if there are any infringements of the built form standards, etc.
Look, I'll look closer at that as the other witnesses present.
That would be helpful.
Report back later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does the panel, while we're at that point in just having those explained to us, does the panel have any questions at this point of Mr. Scrafton?
I have a question, but not specifically on that point.
Should we'll hold that then perhaps till later? Anyone else? All right, well, let's press on then, Ms. Evett, thank you.
Thank you. I have taken the opportunity to try and skip through the rest of the submission, so we'll do our best to move through quite quickly from here. As I said, I was at section 2 of the submissions, and that just included some narrative on the resort zone provisions. Given that Mr. Scrafton's taken you through that, I will not read that to you. So I'm now at para 2.4 of my submissions, where there is a short paragraph just to record where we're at with the consent packages at the moment. I can probably leave that just for the record, but just to indicate that there is a number of consent packages underway, both district and regional consent packages, and they are currently paused in processing at the moment, and there are a number of reasons for that, and actually it's been a slightly iterative process. They were paused late or early last year actually, because the applicant had reformed its mana whenua engagement forum and created a new project steering group. That was as a result of a subsequent application which related to the river-based activities and the ferry service between Mercer and Pokeno. And as a result of that application, there was a broader group of iwi representatives that we needed to bring into the engagement forum. So we had to reconstitute the steering group arrangements at that point. So we've actually got a very active, engaged mana whenua engagement group up and running. And then of course, the inevitable COVID lockdown occurred, and that caused some major disruption rolling from sort of March. So that did have some disruption for the program and the process in terms of that engagement. And as we were coming through that process as a project team and about to pick up pace again, the freshwater regulations came through from the new government late September last year. And as a result of that, we've been re-looking at the master plan and some of our design aspects on the site and looking at refining some of our proposals in light of those regulatory constraints. So there's just been a little bit of work going on in the background, some really productive engagement that's been ongoing. So the consents are still underway and actively being pursued, but there's just been a few things that we've been working through as a team in the meantime. So just wanted to pass that on in terms of an update. At para 2.5, this has just really records the updates to the rezoning proposal as it's tracked through the submission process. I don't think I need to take you through that. I think we're all very clear as to where that's landed, and the officer and Mr. Scranton have obviously reached a high level of alignment. The only thing I would note there is that we have deliberately tried to move to a more national planning standards friendly model in line with the panel's indications in that regard. So I'm moving on, and then again at para 2.6, that we record actually the different iterations of the provisions as we've moved through.
We can take those as read, thanks.
Absolutely, no problem. I was about to say the same. Thanks. At para 2.9, I've just set out the various experts who have contributed to the evidence and expert assessment of this proposal. We're obviously going to leave that and take that as read as well. I just wanted to make the observation that the applicant has really committed a lot of resource and invested in this process. Also wanted to make the observation that there's been very much a depth of expertise that underpins this master planning exercise and the provisions that are before you. I will skip now over to paragraph 4. I'm not going to read that either. The relevant legal framework and statutory tests are very well settled. All I would like to do perhaps is acknowledge again that I'm grateful for the panel for convening that conference in March and getting that issue resolved in advance of the evidence exchange. I think that was a really helpful process. There's no controversy around the statutory tests and the framework that apply, and there's a high degree of alignment between Mr. Scrafton and Mr. Wyeth as to the assessment framework that applies to this particular proposal, and that's very clear when you read the documents. So I'll just leave that as it stands. At paragraph 5, just set out the relevant planning instruments. Again, I don't need to take you through that. I think I'll just acknowledge that both Mr. Scrafton and Mr. Wyeth have undertaken quite a comprehensive assessment. It's recorded in their technical report and in their evidence. And I think it's really, they both conclude, and this is the key point, is that the resort zone is consistent with and gives effect to those relevant statutory documents, and importantly, those higher order planning documents, which is really the key point that I would like to highlight.
Thank you.
I am now racing through at para 5.2. There is a couple of points there that I just want to pick up on in terms of that policy assessment, is that this rezoning has been classified and assessed as a rural activity. And this is the activity itself is fundamentally tied to that rural classification. The whole point of this activity is to showcase that, that rural character, the rural nature of the site. So we're not in any territory here where we're debating an urban environment, urban growth, or the MPSUD requirements. Although actually I would point out that obviously we do generate a lot of employment opportunities, albeit not in an urban environment context. That means that we don't need to get into any debate about future-proof either, or the weight to be attributed to Waikato 2070, which you'll be probably grateful for. Although I would like to point out that Waikato 2070 does actually speak to enabling tourism opportunities, and I think that this proposal does speak directly to that policy direction. So I just would like to note that for your benefit. I've got at paragraph 5.455 through just a section on the vision and strategy for the Waikato River. I won't take you through that in detail because both the expert planners have considered that in some depth. I guess I just wanted to acknowledge on behalf of the Tata Valley team that we see that as the primary policy direction for the region. We acknowledge that, we're very conscious of that, and that's been reflected in the provisions in our approach to this zoning. So I just wanted to highlight that, and we've set out there how the provisions have acknowledged that particular issue. Right, racing through. Again, I had gone through and just picked up some of those key national policy documents. And as you've indicated, there's no controversy in relation to those. So I'll just leave that as read.
Thank you. That's perfectly fine.
Great. So that takes me to section 6 of my submissions, where we have outlined the servicing and access provision for the site. Mr. Pitt-Keithley is here with us and will provide that evidence for you. Mr. Wyeth has considered that. I mean, the key really to note here is that there is sufficient provision for the growth proposed by Tata Valley, both in terms of wastewater and water supply, and that Tata Valley is committed to delivering the necessary connections from the site to that infrastructure. And as you've heard from Mr. Scrafton, the team has relooked at its access arrangements, and as a result actually of a new property acquisition by a related companies throughout the COVID lockdowns last year, there is actually an opportunity for a new connection that's arisen from Yashili Drive through those related land holdings, and that's provided a new opportunity and actually a much better outcome in terms of access for the site. So as Mr. Scrafton indicated, those applications are now before the council and being pursued and provide a new private access way to the site. So that is what has been advanced in terms of this rezoning now before the panel. And Mr. Hills can take you through that in further detail. I've set out at section 7 the sort of cost, benefits and effects of the proposal. Obviously the witnesses will take you through that, and you would probably prefer to hear it from the experts, so I won't go into any detail there. I have at 7.3 set out the key positive effects and benefits of the rezoning, and I think the risk with obviously focusing on the disputed issues in these hearings, that sometimes these are overlooked. So I do want to point you to that section of the submissions at 7.3. This proposal does have a number of substantial benefits, and I did want to draw that to your attention.
You don't need to read them out. We have read it. We're aware of that. Thanks.
No problem. So then moving on to paragraph 7.4, I've just set out for completeness again then how we also then look to manage the effects on the site. And
I think you can take those as read. I mean, it's summarising the evidence that.
Yeah, understood. I was just about to say the same thing.
Thank you.
So I'll just touch on ecology, because I think that's really where the only perhaps outstanding issue lies, although from what I hear from Mr. Wyeth, it's not really fundamental to the rezoning question, but I will just touch on that. I had recorded at 7.15 of the submissions just this issue around whether we should map the natural wetlands, which correspond with the areas that we've identified for protection in relation to the RPS criteria for Indigenous biodiversity. And I'll just talk to that briefly. And I would first like to say that I appreciate Mr. Wyeth acknowledging our concerns around why we're opposed to that mapping of those wetlands. And he's also, I think, probably acknowledged that this is not a major point of contention, and neither is it determinative of the proposal itself. So perhaps it's not fair, it would, I guess from Mr. Wyeth's perspective, it seems like it's a nice to have. And the issue as we see it is it just potentially adds administrative complexity and repetition in functions, and probably just an added complication from our perspective going forward. The Regional Council has been tasked with mapping these natural inland wetlands for the region. And in the interim, these natural wetlands are protected absolutely by the NES. And we are highly aware of that and working with those requirements currently as part of our consenting proposals. So in terms of any effects management issues, these are being comprehensively addressed via the NPS and ENS, and must be addressed via our consent applications. irrespective of whether these are mapped in the district plan. Tata Valley is well versed in its freshwater regulation obligations, and it's been actively refining its master plan to address these and ensure appropriate wetland protection. And these will be comprehensively addressed through its regional consenting, which is the appropriate forum for that.
Well, I think we understand the point. You don't need to give us chapter and verse on it again. We're familiar with the submissions. We're familiar with the issue. So yeah, your point's made and we understand it.
Thank you. I'll move on. I'm moving now to section 8, just really almost wrapping up. There was an issue that was evolving and under discussion through the evidence about the efficiency and effectiveness of the resort zone. And the debate there was really whether this proposal could be enabled through the resort provisions by relying on some existing definitions, or whether it was better suited to a special purpose zone. Now, I know Mr. Wyeth has, and as a result of some sort of evidence exchange and some further analysis of whether the resort zone provisions do provide that sufficient certainty, I think Mr. Wyeth more firmly landed in the view that the special purpose zone is the most effective and efficient method for delivering this proposal. But I've just recorded there for completeness some of the reasons why we see this zoning as essential and why we think we meet the requirements under the national planning standards for that zoning. I don't know if you see that as an area of contention anymore and whether I need to labour that point, but I just wanted to.
No, you don't. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Right, well then the only other outstanding issue, and I say that with some caution, is the just the request by the Waikato Regional Council expert to defer this rezoning pending the outcome of the consent process. I've just touched on that at section 9 of the submissions and recorded our reasons for why we think that is an inappropriate position. Essentially, there is no such requirement within the Resource Management Act that requires consents to be confirmed in advance of rezoning. And we think it would be highly inefficient to require a future plan change process, which is contingent on whether these consents are approved or not. The statutory tests for and considerations under the Act for a plan change are different to those for a consent process, and they're not interdependent on each other. And there will likely be subsequent stages of development and ongoing operation over and above which will be enabled under the current consent packages. As I made earlier, the point is this: the consent packages and rezoning applications were always intended to be complementary and work together to provide for this development. So in our view, that is not a proposal or a request that should stand. So I just wanted to provide a brief update actually now that I think about that, because I just for completeness, in terms of key stakeholders, just to round that out for your benefit, Waka Kotahi was initially opposed to the proposal. They have now confirmed they are neutral as to this rezoning. The Waikato Regional Council, well, they're opposed to the rezoning going ahead of the consents, but they've not really otherwise raised any substantive opposition. So if you don't see any merit in that point, then there's otherwise no substantive opposition from the Regional Council. So just wanted to make that point. Initially, there were a small number of mana whenua groups that were opposed in this first submission round, but as I signalled earlier, Tata Valley are actively working with these groups through this established project steering group forum. And this involves ongoing engagement and is intended to do so right through the development process. And there's been actually feedback from that forum that we've wrapped into these provisions, and that's outlined in Mr. Scrafton's rebuttal. And I just wanted to note that no evidence in opposition has been forthcoming in this process since that first submission round. So just to conclude, based on all the evidence presented, our view is that there is a compelling case with clear evidence that the resort zone will align to realise Tata Valley's vision for the resort, and Tata Valley respectfully requests that the panel approve its request for this rezoning. I would now like to call our first witness, who is Mr. Carl Yee for Tata Valley Limited.
what we're thinking of, Ms. Evatt, just I think we're keen to hear from Mr. Yee and for him to read his summary or to speak to his summary. But with the other witnesses, I think our preference at this point is for them to appear, affirm that their evidence is correct, and then we'll see if we have any questions of them. I don't think it's necessary for the individual witnesses to read their summary statements. If there's anything they wish to highlight to us, they obviously can. But as I foreshadowed at the start, we're very keen to get to the pointy end of what they say, and reading material for the record's not really of much assistance to us. So is that an appropriate way forward from your point of view?
That's absolutely fine. Perhaps if we, yeah, look, that's fine. Everyone's here, everyone's online. I can't hear anyone.
Good. I mean, as I said, we're not trying to shortchange anybody, and we're not trying to deny anyone the moment in the sun. But we are keen to focus on what it is that's either contentious or in dispute or matters that we don't understand. And I think we're pretty all over the detail. So let's proceed on that basis, and we'll see how we go. And if we need to revisit it, we will.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Mr. Chair, because as I understand it, there's no actual submitters opposing coming forward today. And we have read all the evidence, including the summary statements. So it's just a question of whether the panel's got any questions of any particular witness, and then we can sort of move on.
No, look, that's fine. From our perspective, I'm in your hands.
I think we would like to hear from Mr. Yee, though, because he's the proponent, and we'd like to see the, we'd like to hear from him, because I think that is appropriate.
Absolutely.
So let's do that, and then we'll press on as indicated.
That's great. He's
Thank you.
just going to come and join me now. So one moment.
Thank you.
Mr. Yee has a PowerPoint presentation.
Yes.
And he would like to, if possible, share and control that himself. So is that something we can do?
That's absolutely fine. We can arrange that.
Just give me 1 second while we set
Thank
that
you.
up.
I think it's already there.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I did say 1 second, so there we go.
It was just under a second, I think. I had the clock on.
Excellent.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Yee.
Yes, morning. Okay, I can start?
Yes, please.
Sure. So, kia ora, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Mr. Chair and the Commissioner, for your time and attention on Tata Valley. So, I just start to introduce myself first. So, my name is Carl Yee, and sorry, just how to use this one. And I born in China, so many years ago, and now I'm an Australian citizen and also New Zealand permanent resident. So 1994, I started, GMP pharmaceutical in Sydney. And 2001, I duplicate the same business, come to New Zealand, setting the GMP pharmaceutical New Zealand. And so now GMP pharmaceutical is a key player of the New Zealand and Australian dietary supplement industry. So started 2010, I start involved in some property project and some related to the resort business as well. So I looks like a different business go to a different area, but they do have a link between this business. So let's go to the next page. So that's we call the QA business model. So because we do have a quite a unique business model, even right from beginning. So because I cannot find the equivalent model, so that's I give a unique name. We call it the QA value model. So what means a QA value model? Basically, I realize some product or resource have a different value on the different culture or even on the different industry. So we using the sample on in the right hand, you see the picture like the koi cup. in everybody now in New Zealand. It's not a good animal. It's a pest, and a lot of issue cause a lot of issue to the river, to the environment. And so on the top photo I take is it got a processing a site to crush the koi carp into a fertilizer. But in Asia, in Japan and China, Korean culture, the koi carp actually is a good thing. It's traditionally like a symbolic of good luck, and also do have a lot of nutritional property in the koi carp. So that's why in Tata Valley we do have a plan how to contribute to control the koi carp and catching the koi carp and make the koi carp into a nutritional product, either for human being or for pet. So this one is just a sample from product point of view, but as a core value. And for the land related to the Tata Valley, so the Tata Valley land in Pokeno, it's not a good farming land. It's quite hilly and flooded and a lot of foggy as well. So it's not a good commercial land. So, but if come to, that's from the commercial farming industry. If come to the tourist or resort industry, actually it's perfect because they do have a lot of unique feature of the natural, New Zealand natural, and the location and the Waikato River. So that's we saw the it's a consistent of the business model of the core value. So the core value, from the low value come to high value, you need to have a system to transfer. So actually GMP pharmaceutical is a very good working system, we have a track record for 25 years. So basically we convert a lot of low value products into a high value consumer ready product, export to quite a few different countries. So currently GMP pharmaceutical, we employ over 1,000 staff across Australia and New Zealand. And we quite a unique business model. We won quite a lot of industry awards. And also I'm quite proud that GMP is quite an innovative company. So we do own quite a few patent technologies. And all this one is very useful to convert the value from low value to high value. So and this technology, I believe, can be used in Tata Valley as well, like the black box system. And the product of GMP is basically, it's most of the products in general called complementary medicine in Australia. And, but in New Zealand, more fall into dietary supplements or nutritional food. So most of the ingredients come from agriculture source. So the big part is dairy in New Zealand, because New Zealand is a big dairy country. So we do also have animal byproducts, have a herb extracts such as kara and a lot of other, agricultural ingredients. So the idea, for the showcase is come from the GMP products, because we do have a more and more distributor from different country. And this different distributor also bring a lot of consumer group come to New Zealand, Australia as well. So most of them, they want to go to see the farm. So they want to see how the product, coming from, the traceability thing. And so before we have to bring these people to the other farm, and like Frontiera or other farm, but this farm, because they are commercial farm, so it's more focused on commercial benefit. So it's not a visitor or tourist friendly. So the feedback, or from the visitor, the distributor, or tourist, or the consumer group is not that's positive, because they compare to the advertising in their country how the farm should be. So it's a lot of disappointing. So that's make me more determined to setting a more like a visitor friendly or oriented showcase. So that's the idea, quite many years ago I have this one. And so just because this one, I more determined, it's a time. So that's why 2017, I thought it's a time to have my own, agriculture showcase. So the vision for this one, just on this one, the slogan, as you see, we call the window of New Zealand. We just want creating a one-stop location and to showcase the New Zealand agriculture, how the farming process, and how the primary production, how we processing the agriculture ingredients, and what technology involved in. And New Zealand do have quite a lot of cool technologies want to show off to the world. So and allow the people have like a walkthrough cycle to see the product from the farm, to the table. So just like a one-stop, stay. So kind of allow the visitor so they can stay here, relax, enjoy the different activity, and also getting some education for the children and even for some industry people as well. And live stream is quite a popular technology in, especially in China and some other Asian country. That's become one key way to promote or branding the product. So, so that's why Tata Valley will be a popular venue for live streaming for different activity, different farming. So even now, even we haven't do too much already, quite a few, media and the live stream people already using Tata Valley. So that's why you can see on the picture. So they do promoting New Zealand dairy products, and the result are very encouraging. So the people love it, and they think that's really a good background to showcase in New Zealand. So definitely, if this one will be creating a lot of job and for the local and for the country as well. So one question maybe asking why is this land? So that's a question I'm thinking as well. So since we have the idea for my own agriculture showcase, that's more than 10 years ago. So I had to visit many sites in Australia and New Zealand, and but just because of different reason, it's not suitable for my purpose. So until I see the site in Pokeno, that's 2017, and quite a few things. One thing is the location is a good location, close to the airport, close to the CBD, and also got a lot of beautiful, unique natural feature on the site, and also the site is large enough for my one-stop shop. So on the Waikato River, it's a beautiful river. I saw not being used well. It should be used more and to make the people understanding the river culture, and also inside the valley. Also, it's good for the organizing a lot of activity without disturbing too much to the neighborhood. So and especially we engage so many different experts. So the more research from or report from the experts give me more confidence. So this site, this land is really fit for my purpose. And the proposal for Tata Valley, we had working, for 4.5 years. We have a team and do changing time to time, but the key one still the farm show grounds and they made hub. So we were like a one-stop. We will have a different activity, including hotel and the spa and the restaurant conference. So just like mentioned, one-stop. So wetland also is quite an important part. I believe wetland is an important attraction to the tourist and the visitor. So ferry landing, because we have land in Mercer, we just want to use this give visitor quite a unique, Waikato River experience. That's what the visitor want something unique, and also have a lot of other different activity. So for resource consent package, so I think Vanessa and Chris involved in this topic. So and what I say, we do have quite a few further consent package on the planning now, and because the size of the site, the project is big, and if we can getting a resource changing the zoning, I think that will make much easier and much quicker for our future resource consent application and to make it more easier. For Havelock, I may touch a little bit on Havelock. So the Havelock is an extension to the Tata Valley. Because the Tata Valley, we think is have a potential creating more than 1,000 jobs. And so, and because of the Tata Valley, a lot of maybe it's a 24-hour operation. So we wanted the staff in Tata Valley who can live nearby. So automatically we thinking the Havelock Village land is quite close by. And later on, we realized that the Havelock Village land, which 88 Bluff Road, also have a very unique location because that can link the Tata Valley to the town center, and so creating a shortcut, way to the people can come from the town center side, come to Tata Valley, and also from community point of view, the Havelock Village site. It's right in the middle of the community. So I think they can link, all the community from different direction. And actually they have a 5 dead roads stop in the land. So if we can getting this one done, then all the road will be connected. So that will be good for the community integration and also link to the river as well. I may come to the next stage about the plan for Pocono. That's I mentioned one. I think so. Tata Valley and the Havelock Village is quite a big project to combine together. So we do want to committing to the improving the infrastructure for Pocono and the service as well. And definitely the community with these 2 projects in place will be a better integration and connected each other. And I believe Pocono have a lot of potential to be a very good town. So traditionally the Pocono regarded as a town of bacon. So I think maybe that's tradition. I think that Pocono can be a town of riverside town. And so we, myself and our team do committing for long-term growth of Pocono, and so the job will be there, and also we rely on the different experts for how to do a good job for this. So the expert team, and because this the Tata Valley, it's quite a large project, so it's not only rely on my passion or something. You have to rely on the expert to do a good job. So even right beginning, we want to engage the best, expert available. So that's why we did engage all this, quite a good expert. And this expert also is good things because they know Pocono very well, they know the local very well. So so that's what I mentioned. When they give a more report, I was reading their report, talking to them, I have more confidence. So Tata Valley land is really very fit for my purpose to make my dream come true. So for the community engagement, and even right beginning, after I think soon, maybe 1 month or 2 months after I bought the land, we already started engaging to the EV community. So I think the EV community is a very important part for Tata Valley. So that's so far we continually engage with them. I believe we had more than 70 meetings with the EV group, and very useful. And we show our great respect, and also we do listen what's their view on this. So actually, Tata Valley plan we changed over maybe 100 version, 100 times. So many changing just because after we meet the EV group, even other group, and we try to understand the point. Then we think that's a really good thing. So that we reflect in our plan. We do a bit modify our plan. So definitely we getting a lot of advice from the council and from the different community, and also the tourist industry, which I have good connection with the tourist industry, not only from China or Korea, even the Waikato Council local tourist board. So the later you can see attachments. So we get it from China Travel, and also NJT is quite good support because this Tata Valley not only for tourists, also it will be directly or indirectly to contribute New Zealand export to the world, because I showcase all the product. So recently we started talking to the industry leader like Factura, Jasperi. So we are thinking with a business model to inviting the industry leader to participate in the Tata Valley to showcase the best part of their business. So in conclusion, basically, like have this showcase is my lifetime ambition. It's a natural extension to our GMP pharmaceutical business. So me and my team and even the expert I can see are very passionate to have a better project and finally better Okino. So because the last 30 years my mainly GMP pharmaceutical my business. So I thinking the Tata Valley and I believe I have a even better potential from a business point of view, even creating more jobs than GMP pharmaceutical. So thank you again, and for Mr. Chair and the Commissioner for your time, and also by the way, I thank you for all experts. You've done a wonderful job to getting a good report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yee. Let's turn the presentation off for now. Thank you. And let's see if there's any questions. Ms. Sedgwick?
Not for Mr. Yee, but thank you very much for your very, very clear presentation. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Ms. Gibb.
No, but thank you. An impressive dream, and yes, it's very positive looking. Thank you.
Mr. Fulton.
Welcome. Thank you. No, I don't have any questions. Thank you. Appreciate the presentation.
Sorry, thank you. Mr. Marg?
Fantastic presentation, Mr. Yee, but I have no questions.
Mr. Cooney?
No questions, but if we were to grant this, Mr. Yee, good luck.
Thank you so much.
Indeed.
And I don't have any questions either, Mr. Yee, but thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Phil.
Ms. Evan, I think we might, before we start with the witnesses, now probably as good a time as any, I think, just to take a quarter of an hour break for morning tea. And then we'll come back and resume with hearing from your witnesses. How does that sound?
That sounds perfect. Thank you.
Good. Could I just ask you all, please, though, don't log off this call. Just mute your sound and turn your video off. That just makes reconnection a little bit more straightforward. So we'll resume again at 10 to 11. Thanks. So apologies for that. Is everybody back other than me? Looks like it. Sorry about the delay. So let's resume. Thanks. Ms. Evatt, we're with you.
Thank you. The next witness is Mr. Adam Thompson.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and panel.
Morning.
I understand you'd prefer to go straight to questions. I do have a couple of quick points I would.
No, I think, no, by all means, but we just don't need you to read your summary, I think. But yeah, by all means, make the points you wish to make. Yep.
So Auckland has around 2/3 of all international tourists arriving through its airport. The city and Waikato as well has a relatively low culture and recreation spend by tourists. And what's happening essentially is the international tourists are heading south to your Rotoruas and your Queenstowns, etc. So the proposed facility would be relatively unique in that it would help capture some of that spend, which is currently heading out of the Auckland and Waikato districts. I think that's something to bear in mind. The second point I'd make is a facility of this scale is relatively unique, and within the context of Auckland, I would expect really only one facility of this nature, and it could choose a variety of locations to establish. So from the Waikato district's perspective, I think it's important to bear in mind that they stand to benefit from having this located in its own district. And that's really the two main points I'd make, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mr. Thompson. We'll see if there are any questions. Ms. Gibb?
Not really any questions, but I do take your point, and one of the key things that Waikato District looks for is to keep dollars within our district in a spending capacity. So I am taking your points, and I agree with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sedgwick?
Yes, thank you. Just a very small question. Are you expecting, or have you done any calculations on whether this would be attractive to New Zealanders? And if so, what? I can't see it in your highlights. Just what would your estimates be?
I haven't split that for the proposed resort. Tourism is roughly 40% domestic and 60% international. I think the location of the resort within the Waikato, and obviously quite close to the Auckland area, would support a domestic market for it. So I certainly see that being an important locational factor in its success, that it does have that large domestic market within a close proximity. So I would see a good proportion of its market coming from the Auckland area and the wider Waikato, and also Tauranga, Western Bay areas as well.
Would it be fair to say that with its proximity to Auckland Airport, it may become a, if you like, a reverse destination for Queenstown?
It could possibly, yeah, that's an interesting point. You know, I would reiterate that 2/3 of international tourists are coming in from the Auckland Airport, and they often drive south. And there are some things to do in Auckland, but it doesn't have the same outdoor recreation and cultural experiences that you might find in other parts of New Zealand. So I certainly think that's an untapped market opportunity, and I think this proposal is well placed to tap into that.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Fulton?
No, I have no questions, Mr. Thompson. Thank you very much.
Mr. Marg?
Nothing from me, but thank you for your evidence. It's very helpful.
Mr. Kearney?
No, thank you.
No, and I don't have any questions either. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. That's pretty clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd now like to call Mr. Pip Keithley, who covers
Thank
the
you.
infrastructure and servicing aspects of the proposal.
Thank you.
Morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I don't know if you want us to go through any points of my evidence in particular, or we'll just go straight to questions.
If there's anything you wish to highlight to us, now's the time to do that. But that's entirely up to you. We don't need you to, but you're welcome to highlight anything in particular that you wish to highlight.
I suppose I'd like to just make a couple of points on the stormwater side of things, seeing as it is such a sensitive receiving environment, being so close adjacent to the Waikato. And because of the size and the nature of this development, we've got a great opportunity to make sure the water discharges are better than standard. So what I've outlined in my evidence is a series of strategies which can be layered on top of each other, which produces a better than industry standard discharge. And that's also confirmed through the contaminant load modelling that we've done pre and post development, where there has actually been an improvement in the water quality for the Waikato. Other than that, there's nothing in my evidence that precludes this land being rezoned.
All right, thank you, Mr. Pithkelly. I'll get that name right shortly. Apologies. Mr. Fulton, any questions?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you very much.
Ms. Gibb?
No, thank you.
Mr. Marg?
No, nothing from me. Thank you.
Ms. Sedgwick?
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
Mr. Cooney?
No, thanks.
No, and I don't, but I suppose that it would be fair to say that in terms of the vision and strategy, your view would say that the improvements that you were just referring to were precisely the sorts of things that the vision and strategy would be seeking to achieve. and on that basis, to the extent that it's within the area that you've addressed, that this particular project would give effect to the vision and strategy. Would that be fair?
Correct.
All right, no, that's helpful, thank you. And I won't try and pronounce your surname again because I'll get it wrong again, so a bit of a tongue twister, so my apologies, I mean no disrespect. Thank you for your evidence. Pitcairn, isn't it?
Vanessa got it bang on. She's been practicing a lot. So.
Mr. Pitcairn looked at me with some shock when I said I've been practicing, but it's very amusing to us all in the room. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. Pitcairn.
Well done. Right, I would now like to call Mr. Edwards. He is joining us via Zoom, so I hope there we go. Mr. Edwards is covering the geotechnical matters for the rezoning proposal.
Morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I guess I can just go straight to questions if there is anything.
There's nothing you particularly want to highlight for us?
I guess with regards to the geotech side, you've got two real zones. You've got the lower lying area where it's soft and there's peats and things like that, and then on the sides of around the sides of the development, it's more suitable ground, ash soils and things like that. And your key consideration will be slope stability. We do a lot of jobs similar, I guess, with regards to the central basin, such as the Takanini peat areas. We build on those sorts of soils, so it's not uncommon.
All right, no, that's pretty clear. Let's see if there's any questions for you, Mr. Fulton.
No, I have no questions, thanks.
Ms. Gibb?
No, thank you.
Ms. Sedgwick?
All clear, thank you very much.
Mr. Marg?
Nothing from me, thanks.
Mr. Cooney?
No, thanks.
Just one from me, and whenever you see the word risk, you sort of go, oh, you know, and it sort of causes you to pause. When you use the term risk, though, you're using that in its very strict technical sense, that says there's a geotechnical issue that requires thought, as opposed to it being something risky in inverted commas in the normal sense of the word. Would you agree with that?
You're correct there. Yeah, it's just, yeah, when we talk about risk, it's the things that you need to consider with your investigations and, you know, conclude on a solution around it.
And design such that those risks are either minimised or eliminated.
Yeah, so for example, with building the sheds on the flat area, it's a risk that settlement might happen, and the solution is preloading or piling and an appropriate design.
And I think it would also be fair to say, would it not, that there's nothing about the geotechnical nature of this site that makes it any different from lots of others. There's nothing that stands out.
No.
Particular attention or those sorts of things, correct?
No, you're correct. As I say, in the Takanini area, do a lot of commercial developments and residential developments in simple ground, and it's just around how you design your foundations.
Right. No, that's fine. Thank you very much, Mr. Edwards. Thanks for your evidence.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd just like to call now Mr. Hills, who's dealing with the transportation aspects of the proposal. Mr. Hills is also online. I can see he's appeared now, so I'll hand over to him. Thank you.
Thank you.
Morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
I suppose in terms of the highlights, in terms of traffic, probably the key one in my summary is the site is proposed to have a new, which you probably would have seen, new access via Yashili Drive, and that's a new vehicular and wide pedestrian access as well. So that, that's probably the key thing in terms of the access. With the other, I suppose, existing accesses when you went up to Potter and Trigg, just that they won't be, they're maintained just as, I guess, farming access points in the future. Probably the only other thing is, if I can just a little bit of clarification just in one point of my summary evidence, in paragraph 1.12. I'll just give you a little bit of time.
Let me just. You want me to highlight it on the screen?
I can just read it out. The last bit, it was just in relation to Mr. Langwell's evidence that he provided. And the last bit of the sentence says, in my opinion, these issues that are not significant or can be addressed by the revised provisions. And I'll just clarify, when I was meaning those revised provisions, I was relating to those event management conditions that I think were earlier discussed by Mrs. Grafton.
So would it be fair to say that you're really saying that the last line of that where it says or can be addressed, are you saying and have been addressed?
Yes,
by
correct.
the revised provisions?
Correct.
Thank you.
So that's really the key, I suppose the key issue, or the key in terms of, it's that new access, I think, is probably the key point of my my evidence and my analysis. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hills. We'll see if there are any questions for you. Ms. Gibb?
No, thank you.
Mr. Marg?
No, thanks.
Ms. Sedgwick?
I have no questions, but I wanted to say it's a pleasure to read such succinct summaries as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Fulton?
Yeah, I hadn't picked up, but this new road will be, I presume, a public road vested in council. Is that the intention?
At this stage, because of the width, it's a private access way. So yeah, so private at this stage, just because of the width available in terms of, I suppose, reserve road width. It'll essentially be 7 metres in carriageway width and a 2.5 metre footpath. So it's actually, it's quite a reasonable, I'd say it's a high standard private access.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cooney?
No, thank you.
No, and I don't have any questions either. Thank you, Mr. Hill. Thanks for your evidence.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just coming back to that question from the panel members, in terms of that access way and its future operation, that's actually more relevant to the Havelock proposal, which you'll be hearing about in the Pocono hearing.
All right, thank you. We'll note that.
So the actual future public use of that access way will be advanced through that separate proposal.
All right, thank you.
No problem. Right, so that's Mr. Hill. So we're now moving on to Mr. Martin, who was dealing with the ecological assessment of this rezoning.
Thank you.
And here he is. Thank you, Tim. I'll hand over to you.
Morena, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I'm happy to go straight to questions if that's fine with you.
There's nothing you want to point out to us, particularly around the wetlands that seem to have been the subject of at least some discussion between you and council at some point?
But I think possibly just one comment there, in that the 53 areas that I've identified as meeting the Waikato Regional Policy Statement criteria for significance, of those 53, 43 are wetlands throughout the site. So the majority of them are captured by that mapping exercise.
Okay. All right. Well, let's see if there are any questions. Mr. Marg?
No, nothing from me, thank you.
Ms. Sedgwick?
Yes, just a question on the Kahikatea forests. It is, from what I can see from your evidence, it's assumed that these trees will stay. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. They are on the floodplain, subject to radioactive inundation, and they meet those criteria for significance.
Right, so they're regionally significant.
Absolutely.
And potentially with long-tailed bats as well, which gives them the double whammy.
That's correct.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Gibb?
Well, just to confirm, I understand that protection and enhancement of these habitats are what you're aiming for overall. Is that correct?
As an ecologist, that's always my worldview. But what we're aiming for here is a forward path where the values of those are recognised for the development of the plan and the development of any resource consents at the site. So this is the point where we identify the areas which need to be avoided by infrastructure and so forth.
Thank you. Mr. Fulton?
Yeah, no, I have no questions. Thank you.
Ms. Gibb?
No, we've done me.
Oh, sorry, we have two. Did I miss? No, I haven't missed anybody except Mr. Cooney. Sorry, Mr. Cooney?
No, thank you.
Just one from me, Mr. Martin. The NPS fresh water is causing all sorts of angst for all sorts of reasons, partly because of the terminology and the lack of clarity about what a wetland actually might or might not be. But also it's very prescriptive set of recommendations that mean that there's a lot of areas that are sort of wet and not much more are actually defined as being natural wetlands. If you were putting just your own lens on these areas rather than the NPSFM lens, would your conclusions be any different? Would the values of the wetlands on this site be lower or higher than what the NPS ascribes to them?
The NPS is identifying wetlands of any state from pristine to highly degraded. So it's really the first lens to look at for where are wetland habitats, and gives a bit more criteria around the definition of a wetland in the RMA. The second lens is when it really looks at, well, where are the ecological values that matter within that landscape? And that's where the criteria in the Waikato Regional Policy Statement are a useful tool, because obviously there's a spectrum there from wetlands, which, yes, they're wetlands, they may have some biodiversity values, through to wetlands that are absolute gems in the landscape. And so, yeah, the natural wetland criteria is a starting point, but I think for ecological values is largely superseded by the significance criteria that I have applied.
No, that's helpful. Thank you. Thank you very much for your evidence, Mr. Martin.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think you missed Mr. Marg from that questioning.
No, you actually didn't miss me, but I just thought of a question that I had previously thought about and I forgot to ask him.
He was first this time. I try and rotate it round, but sometimes I forget what way I rotated it. So fire away, Mr. Mark.
Just a question in relationship to what you've done and provided to us. How involved were the Mana Whenua group in relationship to the wetlands and your identification?
The identification is driven by the criteria in the RMA and in the district plans and so forth. I have had a few hui with local iwi with regards to this project, not so much with regards to where the wetlands have been mapped, but about the proposed effects of infrastructure that consent is being sought for.
And like in relation to historical values, I guess around Mahina Kai, was that ever come up in the conversation with your identification with these people?
Yeah, absolutely. And we know there are values in the wetlands and also the watercourses within the site for species such as tuna, eel, kura, inanga, and so forth. And that's identified in our ecological assessments when we get down to the species level of those.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mark, and thank you, Mr. Martin.
Who is giving landscape and visual evidence.
Thank you, Mr. Pride. Welcome. It's good to see you.
Yes, good morning, commissioners and the chairman. Just a couple of quick points to start with. Just from a landscape and visual perspective, the site is very well suited to a development such as this. It has a very good visual containment from the surrounding area through the landform characteristics and in particular vegetation, specifically the kakatias along the river frontage. In terms of the visual and visibility of development within the site, clearly the hotel precinct is going to be the most visible aspect of the development. However, as we have heard previously, it will require an RDA and associated matters of discretion relating to building design and appearance, articulation of mass, visual bulk, textures, colours and materials will ensure that any potential adverse visual and landscape effects on the surrounding rural environment can be appropriately managed. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, Mr. Pryor. Ms. Gibb.
No, thank you. No questions.
Ms. Sedgwick.
Thank you, Mr. Pryor, for just clarifying that about the hotel, because I was a little worried when I saw it. It looked like the image, and I know it's an image, it was a large white thing on the top of a whole lot of green. But I'm happy with your explanation, so thank you for providing that.
Mr. Mark.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Mr. Fulton.
Oh, I have no questions. Thank you very much.
Mr. Cooney.
No, thank you.
I just have one, Mr. Pryor, and it's really the question that, or the comment that Ms. Sedgwick made. If I just share the screen with you, can you see that?
Yes, I can. Yep.
And I totally appreciate. So I'll just move the screen out of the way. I totally accept that that's just a sort of a architect's rendering.
Correct. Yes.
And it's pretty stark. What would you see being the sort of treatment that you'd be superimposing on that image, if indeed that's the base case of what's intended to be constructed there?
Well, I think I mean, as those images show, certainly the top one is a full-on image. I think the bottom one is more of what people would actually see in relation to the surrounding landscape and landform and the hill backdrop. I do consider that those matters of discretion will address any potential adverse effects, particularly, the breaking down of the mass and the form and the colour and textures that will be used in the actual building itself.
So, I mean, I understand that they are the assessment matters, but in terms of just looking at that, the sorts of things that you'd be doing would be to dull the colour down and
correct,
more with the background, those sorts of things.
Yes, a little bit less white. Yep. More natural landscape colours.
Thank you. And I haven't related these images to those that you had in your primary statement, but I'm assuming that these are sort of to show the location off in its fullest extent, as opposed to being from a particular viewpoint. Or have I got that wrong? I mean, these seem to be sort of from like a drone location rather than a physical location on the ground, or have I got that wrong?
No, that's correct. These were the images that we based our assessment on, and had the I think we had a couple of photo montages from Bluff Road looking across.
Okay. So they are from terrestrial locations. They're not.
No, these ones are purely architectural ones. So yeah,
they are drone shots. Yeah, that's what that's helpful. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Mr. Pryor. Thank you very much for your evidence.
Thank you.
That brings us back to Mr. Scrafton as the final witness in planning matters.
Thank you.
I don't intend to highlight anything I feel I've probably covered most matters earlier, but I would, just going back to the question you left with me, I've noticed the, on my paper version, I don't know if it's the same for you, but under 29.7, which is right at the end of the page.
Sorry, let me just get it back again.
Yeah.
29.7. Yeah, I'll just.
So it's the start of the activity-specific matters of discretion. There is a there's a note that says, in addition to the general matters of discretion outlined in 29.6, the following matters of discretion will be considered for specific activities.
Yes.
I have to admit, it took me a while to find it. So I did think of an alternative, more specific approach as well, which would be to, at the start of the provisions at 29.7.16, includes words to the effect of, in addition to any relevant matters in 29.6 and 29.71 to 29.715, council's discretion will be restricted to the following matters. To just tidy that up, if there's still a concern, it's a bit too.
I don't think it's a concern as such, but
yeah, the intent was definitely there.
You don't really want to create, I wouldn't have thought you'd want to create an argument later where you might come along and say, well, these others don't apply, and someone else says they do, and you end up in an argument about interpretation. So I think we'd always prefer to clarify things as much as possible, and I think that's a helpful suggestion.
Yeah, I'd agree with the addition of those words just for clarity.
Thank you. Let's see if there's any questions for you, Mr. Fulton.
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
Ms. Gibb.
No, thank you.
Mr. Marg.
No actual questions, but I did see something about the vision and strategy, Mr. Scraft, and you referred to 2008 was written by the Waikato River Authority.
Oops.
It was written by the Guardians Establishment Committee. Just a minor correction.
Sorry, my apologies. You're quite right. That's an oversight on my behalf.
Otherwise, no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sedgwick?
No, none from me. Thank you.
Now I've confused myself. Ms. Gibb, did I ask you? You've got me on high alert now. I think I did.
Good. Keep yourself there. No, I'm all good. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cooney.
No, thank you.
Just got one in relation to subdivision. And as I read the provisions and as was summarised earlier, the subdivisions mirror those in the rural zone. Can you just explain to me what that would mean, for example, if Tata Valley at some point in the future said, look, we want to subdivide off, for argument's sake, 5 hectares of this for hotel worker accommodation, or to provide 3 or 4 lodge type dwellings for prominent visitors that might be a bit too special to stay in the lodge or the hotel, you know, those sorts of things. Would that be easy or hard?
I think that would be reasonably straightforward. It would be a restricted discretionary activity from my recollection for rural subdivision, provided you meet the standards. And it would be consistent with that type of scenario would be reasonably consistent with the operation of the resort. And I think would be a reasonably straightforward consent.
What about the issue that Ms. Ebbett then raised early on and said this is actually a rural activity? Is there not a risk with those subdivision provisions that this could end up becoming a lot more urbanised in the future and actually morph into something quite different from what's contemplated at the moment?
The subdivision would still be as per the rural zone. I guess the scenario you're potentially raising is whether you could then get the enabling provisions of the Tata Valley zone to replicate itself in a number of lots. For example, the 1,000 square metre visitor accommodation standard applying, say, 2-3 times. Is that the kind of scenario?
Well, I'm thinking of, I mean, part of the rationale for this proposal is the fact that it integrates with they're my words, not necessarily yours, integrates with Pocono and integrates with what's happening there, and in particular, but not exclusively, with Havelock. And as it stands, this is a standalone resort-based development, but it's not entirely, what's the word? It's not entirely speculative to say that at some point you might want to expand part of Pocono this way on the basis that, you know, it makes sense for the workers to live on site, for example, and then you end up with another suburb of Pocono, let me put it that way, being proposed. And I'm just wondering whether the subdivision provisions might actually be too loose, given that this isn't really a rural development per se, and the rural development aspect of it's already been captured by the resort development, such that further subdivision of it's probably not a good idea. What do you say to that?
I would say I'd be very concerned of the possibility of urban-esque subdivision occurring here for precisely the reasons you raise. And there is a potential of creep, I guess you would say, which I would certainly support the provisions controlling. I don't think the rural subdivision doesn't allow for urban development. The policy is quite clear on that.
Yes.
So I would hope that the risk is very low. But if I would, and I haven't turned my mind too much to it, but if there was a risk, I would suggest adding additional provisions to stop that scenario if deemed necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that answer. What's been standard practice in our hearings to this point, where there's been, you know, a Section 42A recommendation and other parties have disagreed? We've said to the 42A report writers, just come back to us after the conclusion of the hearing with a revised set of recommendations if your views changed, having heard the evidence. I think in this case, certainly from my point of view, and I haven't discussed this with the panel, I think it would be helpful if you and Mr. Wyeth at least touched base on those aspects, so that when he does reply, not that there's much for him to reply to, you could either say we agree that it needs to be tweaked, or we don't, just so that we've got a more robust evidential basis for whatever decision we might come to. You're happy to work with Mr. Wyeth on that basis?
Absolutely, yes, very much so.
All right, that's helpful, thank you.
Just on that point you raised earlier, Mr. Chair, what is the status of subdivision under your proposed provisions?
It would be the same as the rural zone. So provided certain standards around sizes, for example, are met, I believe it's restricted discretionary for a rural subdivision.
Rural subdivision says you've got to have 40 hectares, doesn't it?
Correct.
And if you wanted to cut off a smaller lot, it'd be non-compliant.
I believe so. I haven't got the memory of the latest set of provisions.
I think it is from memory.
I think that's right. And it may be that you and Mr. Wyeth conclude that there's no change needed. Well, but I'd prefer you to, I'd prefer you to close the loop off for us. And if you say there's no need for any changes, then that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, and I've been, trying to think of the scenarios. The potential of being able to suggest some kind, as I say, a creep effect is one I'd like to explore with Mr. Wyeth. But beyond that, I think if you rely on the provisions of the rural zone, it's probably okay.
All right, and that's fine. I appreciate the answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Wyeth, was there something you were wanting to add to that?
I was just going to say, as my understanding is, yes, it's restricted discretionary for subdivision where you comply with the standards, and it defaults to non-compliant when they're not met. But yes, certainly happy to work with Mr. Scrafton and resolve this one.
That will be fine. Thank you very much for that. We'd appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Scrafton.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scrafton. That is the end of our evidence, and also, if you have no further questions of me, the end of the case for Tata Valley.
No, thank you, Ms. Evans. I don't think we do, but I don't, but let's just see if there's anything from the other members of the panel before we adjourn. Mr. Fulton?
No, no, thank you.
Mr. Marg?
No, nothing from me, but thank you all, in particular, Mr. Yee.
Ms. Sedgwick?
Just by way of confirmation, I think, from what you've said, and you touched on this a number of times, are you confident that you have reached a position with the mana whenua that is agreeable to all of you?
The position that we've reached with mana whenua is one of an ongoing engagement process.
Thank you.
There is a project steering group and an ongoing forum that is an active sort of forum, and we're working with those groups on a regular basis. There is what is described as a cultural heritage management plan framework that is underway, and we're working through that process, and that process is intended to guide both the development and the consenting, and then also ultimately the operation of the resort as it unfolds. So I don't think it's fair to say there's a position that's agreed, but there's a framework for ongoing engagement that is ongoing, and actively we're working through that.
Excellent, thank you.
Mr. Kearney?
No, thank you.
Ms. Gibb, you thought I'd forgotten you, but I hadn't. I was just doing you last this time.
No, thank you. Leading on from Commissioner Sedgwick. So yes, you've got a process with mana whenua. So the indications positive at this point that you're able to work together, that there's no serious conflicting information that's come through, or not?
No, I think it's a positive engagement process. As outlined in Mr. Scrafton's evidence, we've taken on board their feedback and we're feeding that through the provisions. And obviously, as evidenced by this process that we're currently in, there's no active opposition that's come forward.
Very good.
Yeah, that's very good. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ms. Evett. I think that brings us to the end of today. We've done quite a lot of these Zoom hearings now. I'm not sure what number we're up to, but virtually all of our hearings have been via Zoom. We're finding it particularly effective and efficient. Would be interested, Ms. Evett, in your thoughts. You've been not necessarily a regular participant in the Zoom hearing format with us. Any particular comments for us for the future?
No, I think it's worked really well. It's an interesting one for us with a bigger team. It was a bit of a challenge to know how that would work with sort of some experts here with us and some online. So there was a little bit of nervousness about how that would all fall into place, but actually it's worked remarkably well. I'm very grateful for how much pre-reading that's been done, and obviously really active engagement. So from my perspective, it's been really positive. I'd like to thank you all for your time and attention. I think as a team, we're very grateful for that. And also, again, just to acknowledge Mr. Wyeth's role and the work that he's done. Very grateful for his involvement as well. So thank you.
Very good. That's excellent. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you, everybody. I suppose it goes without saying, we're issuing all of our decisions on the district plan as a whole as a single package. So whilst this particular aspect's quite neat and tidy and circumscribed, everyone's going to have to wait until the full package comes to light in due course. But just wanted to make that clear in case it wasn't. But thank you, everybody. So we're now adjourned.
Thank you very much.